Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Joe, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show, man. How you doing?
I'm doing good, Robbie. What's going on?
Oh, it's a world that we're living in, and the world seems to be darker every time I dive deeper into the Kennedy assassination. I don't know if that's by plan, but it's working out.
Well, it's good timing too, because Bobby Kennedy Jr. just announced that he's running for president, and which frankly fills me with a lot of trepidation.
I'm in probably an unpopular opinion of I don't think that the powers that be are going to let that happen. I might I just because he's so connected to the Kennedy stuff and the COVID stuff, and I know people are like, well, you're shaming him. Like I've been yelled at for saying that my opinion on that, but it just he's connected to so much, and I know like I'll first time I'll vote, it'll be with him. But it's just I just don't know. There's gonna be dead people that are gonna be voting for the opposite person or whatever. That's what I'm saying is the powers that be, man.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I think he knows that this is a quixotic thing. I think the idea is to just to try and get some of these issues on the table. Um, I got to meet Bobby Kennedy Jr. a long time, like almost 20 years ago, I think. He came to speak at San Antonio. And at that point, he was just speaking about the environment. He gave this great speech about the commons and how we're misusing the commons. And so I got to, but it was like in a big group, just saying hello, shaking his hand, whatever. But it was cool. Because I had, and I took off work, skipped out on work to go see him speak, because obviously he doesn't come to San Antonio very often. Um, I mean, he's legit. He's the real thing, and he's talking about real stuff. And I am very concerned about that. But I'm also, I mean, I'm glad that he's doing this. He's obviously doing this for historical purposes. He's saying somebody's got to talk about real issues that we're dealing with as a culture, and frankly, that affect the world. Um, so more power to him. Yeah, and yes, I will. I will. He has my vote. My vote.
Now, when it comes to obviously, a lot of my recent episodes have been very focused into how deep kind of the government entrenchment goes. And like, I mean, even with like, we talk about media manipulation, which we've done in the past, me and you on separate episodes. But if you look at like even recently, NARA released or got 400 something documents, and I didn't see anything about that anywhere. I had someone tell me that, and I had to go find those documents where I go, why isn't that not news? 18,000 that were released, or however many, 13,000, I think it was, that was released, was news, but not the 400 ones. And I mean, there's not a whole lot of goodies in there, but it did kind of bolster up some of the things when it came to Marina possibly being a KGB swallow or any of these. This was interesting stuff because we already had US versions of that. So now it's kind of it's not really elaborating anything, but you're just seeing a different perspective of it, which I think is very enlightening. But the fact that the media hasn't even covered that, even though everyone was so willing when the document release happened to jump on board saying, who wants to run these documents through me? Who wants to tell me all about it?
Yeah, no, and it's some of the stuff that was mentioned. Well, where I first encountered it was in John Armstrong's research, where he posited basically that there was a Russian program to get Russian children infiltrated into the United States that would then be spies, and that's part of his thesis in that book, and it's very interesting. But it's obviously not something that anybody talks about in any mainstream way whatsoever. Like there's no attention. Like that just seems preposterous. Although actually there was a film. Angelina Jolie made a movie called Salt, and I only saw like the middle. It was one of these things where I walked into and somebody's watching this movie, and it kind of got my attention because I was like, "Wait, what?" Because the premise of that movie seems to be something very similar to what Armstrong was talking about in his book, because that is about a like a Russian program where you're putting in people into the United States and frequently doubled, because that was the main premise is that there's a Harvey Oswald and there's a Lee Oswald, right? One of them speaks Russian, the other one doesn't. There's all kinds of other differences. It's really it sounds wild. It still sounds wild to me, but there's a significant amount of evidence that Armstrong produces, which, by the way, nobody else has produced because he did so much legwork chasing down people who knew Oswald when he was a kid. And there's just it's an amazing piece, and very interesting. And I'm not 100% sold on all of it, but it's you can't ignore the massive evidence that he accrued.
What are some stopping points for you in the Kennedy assassination? Like moments that you, or things that you just can't get with?
I mean, Judy Baker, James Files. Um,
You don't think he took off the scope of his rifle and was looking through
uh,
it?
it's more the cult of personality thing I don't like. So as long as somebody has a thesis, like good example of that actually is Ed Haslam, who wrote the book Dr. Mary's Monkey. There's a whole saga about Ed Haslam had written a book about New Orleans, um, and then met Judy Baker, and then sort of incorporated Judy Baker's story into a later edition of his book. But I think Ed Haslam's research stands on its own. Like it's really interesting, and I don't think you need to buy any of the Judy Baker stuff to make it so. So I mean, and I guess what I'm trying to say is that sometimes there's, even though I may disagree with the thesis, like sometimes there's a lot of good work inside. And that's even true sometimes of really crummy books, like the Myers book with evidence, which has some useful things in it, and also what's the other one that came to mind just now? I lost it. But anyway, there are books sometimes that, oh, Mortal Error, which is a really stupid book. It's about the accidental shooting of Kennedy by one of the Secret Servicemen, which is inane thesis, but the book isn't terrible in other spots. Like I can't reference it because of the fact that the main thesis is just ridiculous. But it's not like 100% bad. Like sometimes there's nuggets in there sometimes that are useful. Just some books have a really bad ratio of good to bad, stuff inside of them.
So do you
But yeah,
believe
like the mob,
you said the mob?
stopping points. I was going back to the stopping points thing. But what was your question?
I was gonna say, but do you believe like multiple Oswalds? I mean, clearly someone was using his name and
Yeah.
stuff, but
Oh
I
no,
just
no, yeah, no question.
I just don't know how many though. That's the thing. Like I keep coming across, like I came across even in the Warren report that there was a U.S. Selective Service System or an person that was interviewing for U.S. Secrets or Selective Service System, and Harvey Oswald was the name that was used, and that's in the Warren report. But then the person even stated that this Harvey Oswald didn't match the Lee Harvey Oswald. That was the one. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No, there's tons and tons of evidence that there were duplicates of Oswald or people impersonating Oswald. In fact, even Hoover says they're impersonating Oswald. But the question is specifically the program that Armstrong is pointing to, that there is specifically a Lee and there is specifically a Harvey, and they're not the same height, and they went to different schools, and there's all. I mean, it's fascinating, but that's a specific claim that is unrelated necessarily to the fact that there are duplicates. Richard Popkin, as far as I know, was the first person to really write about that in a book called The Second Oswald. It's a pretty early book. Believe it was in the late 60s. And he was a professor. And his book was out of print for a while, but actually it just so happens, like last week, I saw that somebody reprinted it. So there's actually a new copy out there. I mean, I don't know how new it is, but in the last few years. So I was like, oh, cool. Well, I'm going to get the new one too. But yeah, so it's and that's where I kind of am in. So whether the specific claim is true or not, there's a lot of interesting evidence that points to the fact that I think we can say reasonably that definitely there were Oswald duplicates roaming around that were not Oswald. The Oswald that was arrested, not that guy. Whether that was specifically one of the people that Armstrong is talking about, I'm not sure.
Now, when like if you were yeah, if you were gonna pitch someone about the Kennedy assassination, like imagine I haven't talked to anybody about the Kennedy assassination yet, and I was kind of like thinking, just agreeing with the narrative. If you were gonna show people your best evidence, your best points to be like, this is suspicious stuff, what would that suspicious stuff be?
It's I pointed a lot of those out in like the very first essay that I did for Diagenio called the JFK 10-point program, where I was trying to get points that all researchers could agree with, and of course researchers don't agree with all of them, but those are the ones that I thought were most convincing. The fact that see, the bullet that is supposedly the bullet that went through Kennedy has no damage on it. So C399, right? That the damage on the bullet is not consistent with going through a body and hitting bone and then exiting and then hitting another bone. Like, it doesn't make any sense. The bullet is pristine. Um, Stuff like that. So that are, I think, that are very easy to understand. The problem with that approach that I found is that um, people tend to gravitate to a story. And this is true even in normal legal cases. Like, so when you're in the jury, and let's say you've got a murder case, the lawyer for the defense technically does not have to produce a story. All they have to do is prove that their person did not commit whatever crime is being discussed. But as a practical matter, because humans love stories, defense typically has to come up with alternative suspects or an alternative story. And that's where we tend to get in trouble, because then we're getting into speculation. And that's how I feel about the Oswald case. So I think there's a good body of evidence that suggests that Lee Harvey Oswald never fired a shot that day, right? There's no positive evidence that he did so, other than the FBI paraffin test, which actually cleared him in a sense, because it showed that he did not fire a rifle because it was not on his cheek, right? But he did have some of that on his hands. But it was also suggested that he could have gotten that from the sixth floor museum from just moving newspapers and boxes around, that he could have gotten that same effect. So those are the kinds of things that I like to tell people so that to get them thinking. But almost invariably, the thing that I run into is that people want a story. So they want me to tell them, like, okay, well, if Oswald didn't do it, then who did, and how did that happen? And I was like, well, I may not have the answers to those, because we're getting into speculation there. So I may not have an alternative story to tell you, other than, like I say, what my approach is to pull all the way back up and say, does this operation resemble other operations, both in the United States and in foreign countries? And then the answer is yes. And then we can start reasoning at that level. And they say, if we all understand that the CIA took out Arbenz in Guatemala, right? And we understand that that is a true thing that happened, and all of the things that are involved with getting that to happen, the United Fruit Company, which later became Chiquita Banana in the 80s, right? But the United Fruit Company was a CIA operation. Okay. Once you understand how elaborate those plans are, then you can see, oh, I see why people have these elaborate theories involving the Kennedy assassination, because these things do resemble each other. And it's not absurd to suggest that whole organizations could be invented on the fly, because this is something that has happened in other countries that we know happened. So that's what I try to do.
I find that if you point people more towards Cold War history, things that are solidified in different aspects that aren't Kennedy related, you at least get more of a understanding of the culture, especially for my generation, people that haven't, like, that's what a lot of people forget when I do these podcasts and stuff. My information, when I come across like issues that I have with the Mary Farrell site of putting up paywalls, I understand people need to get paid, but there's a bunch of stuff that I start coming across. I didn't live in the time to experience it when it happened. I didn't get to slowly grow with the amount of time that went on. So I'm trying to go and find the documentation. Anybody who's sitting in my boat in the public, general public, is going to come across paywalls, someone saying you can get it in my book, all this type of stuff, which makes me be kind of angry about some of these sites where I'm looking through documentation now off the government website. Not every single thing is going to be on a document, but I've learned so much more from just trying to understand the 60s better. Dealing with Cold War tactics and different spy information, different government operations as well too. But the issue is if it's not solidified in stone, if it's not well public knowledge in history, then what do I point to? Because I even look at with Wikipedia on Lee Harvey Oswald. That thing has changed multiple times since I first screenshotted a couple things like months ago. And then I say that and people go, oh, yeah, that's a conspiracy. I'm like, well, here's the document and where they said this. And if you check there now, it doesn't say this anymore. So why are they doing that? Oh, because it was a statement or what is? No, it's because I had a reference point, and now all my reference points have to be something that is like big, like using LSD in the 60s. That's not controversial. They used it. But you start explaining this to people, people go, well, then ask other questions like, well, what about LSD usage? I mean, how far did it really go? I don't know. Look up the heart attack gun. Look up ice bullets. Look all like that's what I can point to. But then what context does that have for the Kennedy assassination? All it does is show you what your government can do. And it's like, I don't know what else to point to if I'm trying to get new people interested into, especially with this era of people labeling things misinformation, which they don't even look at it. They just kind of label it that, and then they don't like it. And if it goes against the narrative, it's like, well, seriously, there's real documentation to back up a lot of this stuff. Just look at the documents that they printed for you.
Yeah, no, and this is the main. I think this is going to be the main issue and the main danger for all of us going forward is that the tighter and tighter control of information means that there are fewer and fewer um, ways to dissent from whatever the standard uh, theory is supposed to be about anything without getting into trouble or without losing access to jobs, without, if you're a professor, you don't have tenure anymore, you can get fired for anything, so they're terrified of doing anything controversial. And that's what happens, right? People start self-censoring themselves. They say, well, I don't want to think about this. And why would I ever get into something like the Kennedy assassination, which doesn't affect my life today? It does actually, but people don't see that connected. I say, why would I even get into, it's a bunch of craziness and I don't need the trouble, right? I don't need my videos getting knocked down or whatever it is I'm trying to do interfered with because I'm having unpopular opinions about something that happened 60 years ago, or, even 20 years ago, if you're talking about 9/11 or whatever. That is going to be the principal issue, I think, going forward, is that level of state control, because people tend to accept that if something's debunked, then it's debunked. And they don't ask, well, who is doing the debunking? What does that debunking consist of? And does the debunking make any sense? Does it actually debunk anything? And the answer is almost always no, partly because almost nothing can be answered yes or no about anything in history, right? Or blue red. It just doesn't work that way. It's always like these different uh, complicated little issues that are going on inside the thing. But if you have any hope of understanding that at all, you've got to be able to talk about it. You can't just say, oh, that's bad, which is how it is now. If I say anything other than, whatever the state wants me to say, then I'm a bad guy.
Do you notice that with any other assassinations, though? Like when you talk about Malcolm X or if you talk about Martin Luther King, do you notice that anybody rolls their eyes like that?
Kind of. It depends on the context. When I've been speaking about, like, say, Malcolm X, for example, if there were people that are old enough to remember Malcolm X, sometimes they get strong reactions because they didn't like him, because they feel like he was a violent zealot or whatever, as opposed to Martin Luther King. And the most recent Netflix documentary, which came out, I guess now 2 or 3 years ago, tended to shy away from state operations and put all the blame on internal Islamic rivalry within the American Islamic movement, which has nothing to do, by the way, with what you would call worldwide Islam or mainstream Islam. It's a whole other thing. It's its own thing. And so they tend to limit the scope. It's like, well, Malcolm X was saying a lot of violent stuff, and the chickens came home to roost for him, and his own people killed him because they didn't like him anymore. Not that this is part of a state operation, that no matter who's doing the actual killing, like in terms of who holds the gun, the question is who paid that person, who arranged that person to be there, all that stuff. That tends to get ignored. Same thing is true for Martin Luther King, although there are more people who are suspicious of the King assassination, I think, precisely because he championed non-violence and was done away violently. And I think people understand that there's some correlation there, that maybe he was killed because he had these bad opinions, which is, bad in quotes. And that's why when so I just did this thing at the Memphis conference, which is put on by Professor David Denton, which is terrific. And unfortunately, I couldn't get there in person, so I had to do it by video. And then they have this panel, and then they have this giant television with my big head on it, scaring everybody, right next to him. Right?
Don't look behind the curtain.
Exactly. No, that's good. Yeah, I was thinking about 1984 and Big Brother, but yeah, it could have been the Wizard of Oz. But what I started out talking about was King's April 4th, 1967 speech, The Time to Break Silence, exactly 1 year before he was killed. Because if you look at about the last third of that speech, Martin Luther King is talking about foreign policy. And he even invokes John Kennedy's name in the context of what he's talking about. And he starts with Vietnam, but he says, oh, by the way, we're interfering in Peru, we're interfering in Venezuela, we're interfering in Guatemala. And this was all true. And in fact, in Guatemala, a year and a half after he gave that speech, there was another coup in Guatemala, where a guy was overthrowing the United States backed person, and he was able to stay in power for about 6 or 7 years, if I recall correctly. But in other words, Martin Luther King was saying the same thing. He's looking at this, he's looking at the world, and he says, we are interfering with and killing people in other countries through covert and overt operations. And then a year later, he is killed. And that, I think, is an important thing to notice about this. And Malcolm X, the same thing. When Malcolm X was murdered, he had renounced his former opinions about white devils. He said, I went to Mecca and I ate with people who were white, and they were my brothers and sisters. They were not my enemy. And then he started going on this world tour. He started going to different countries and talking to them as a kind of ambassador. And that is what made him extremely dangerous, because now he's somebody who is trying to get other countries to come together to resist some of these operations. And then he's killed. So that's where I think these things are connected.
Do you know how Martin Luther King got his information that they were running covert ops in other countries?
It's hard to say. I assume that he was just reading the newspaper, and because that's what Made Brussels used to do. And if you know what you're doing, you can see what was going on even in 1968. But you had to have a certain amount of other knowledge about these things that were happening. Now, we know that one magazine that Martin Luther King read at least occasionally was Ramparts, because it was Bill Turner's Ramparts article on the children of Vietnam that caused him to give that speech on April 4th, 1967. So he was aware of some of the literature that was out there, and he was clearly reading some of it. They talk about, especially at the time, newspapers and the FBI said that he was a communist plant and that Russia was paying Martin Luther King, which is a conspiracy theory in itself, right? If you say the Russians have sponsored Martin Luther King's rise to power, and then that is a conspiracy theory. It may be true, maybe false, without any evidence, but it is a conspiracy theory. So it tells you that that's an acceptable conspiracy theory to have in the 60s about Martin Luther King. But yeah, no, I think that the state kills these individuals, and the reason that they're killing these individuals is they think that they're making business more difficult for them in other countries.
Is it?
It's
Do you also think
interfering with
it's
colonialism?
in part? Do you think it's also because of the fact that their kind of next thing to kind of hit people with the fear or hit people with the divisiveness to distort the population is also the race narrative as well too? I mean, they do that with fear on many different things. Like during the pandemic, we saw that, but they always hit like the race topic either, then climate change and a bunch of stuff. And I'm not saying those things aren't problems. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm saying they exist, but the media just milks the shit out of it because they know they can. And the government uses that to their advantage to divisivize populations. And I looked at like the riots that happened at Kent State University, all these types of things that started going on. There's a lot of evidence to support that those people, that those witnesses, the people that were in the protest saw, that said that those were cops that were wearing normal clothes that would throw a brick or something so the police could just come in and take them over. I mean, it's a really smart strategy, but I think it helps you understand of like they kind of need the fuel of like people fighting each other so they can continue to do their business interests.
Yeah, even going up to the riots in Ferguson, where it looked like there was cops in there that were doing property damage to further incite the riot. That's a standard, the move bombing. This is a standard playbook for the United States government and it even worked inside the Black Panthers. We know that they were infiltrating the Black Panthers. But with regard to the whole weapons thing, it is funny because you're absolutely right that they did prey on the fear of armed Black resistance, right? And guess what didn't happen? The NRA did not put out a poster of Bobby Seale and Huey Newton saying, yay, guns, right? Because the NRA is not interested in giving people of color weaponry. They're interested in white people having weaponry. So they don't stick to their principles if it happens to be an armed resistance to what they called an occupying authority, i.e., the police, to support the Black Panthers.
Is that real? I don't know too much about the NRA.
Yeah, National Rifle Association. Yeah, they're. I mean, you can just go down the
Is it
line.
like the
That's a
American
whole.
Legion? They all kind of freak me out, like Boy Scouts.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, I'm from Texas, so everybody has a gun here, more or less. Not so much in the neighborhood that I live in, but yeah, generally speaking, you expect everybody to be carrying in Texas. It's a way of life, it's a culture, and it's why people get so upset. You know, they're going to take away my guns, even though the guns that they're talking about taking away are these like mass casualty weapons. You know, and nobody's taking away your 38 special. You know, it's or whatever the hell. I don't know. You know, guns are not my thing, so I'm not very well versed on them.
What's the most surprising thing to you about just anything you've really learned from the government? I think I've been, like I mentioned in the beginning, I've been entrenched in the fact of how deeply connected they are to everything. I mean, but ice bullets is crazy and all that.
I mean, the thing that blew my mind, I guess, to start with, was John explaining, like the very first time I met John, we talked for hours and hours, and he was talking about the different connections at the social level that all of these people have. And I was not aware that the Ivy Leagues, right, in addition to producing the quote unquote best and the brightest, also produce CIA agents. Like the government tends to go to those universities, Yale, and
Harvard.
they tend to have Harvard. They tend to have secret societies within those, um, in which you do something embarrassing or you share secrets that connects you to other people, men typically connects you to other men, but also gives you a reason not to go along with everything that's going to happen, right? Because if you were filmed jacking off in a cemetery in a in a grave that they made for you, then they have that on you and they know, hey, you remember that time that's all you have to do. So it's a social cohesion. It's a glue to bond people together, but also to serve as future blackmail for people who are involved in those groups. I mean, you basically sell your soul, right? You're going to have a great life. You're going to have money. You're going to have position. But you're also going to have to do a whole bunch of nasty stuff for us to keep all of those things that you desire.
So creating leverage to possibly use for a potential something you wanted later down the road.
Yes. And then the proliferation of those groups, which is the thing that people think is absolutely crazy, and which a lot of the right wing sort of researchers have picked up on, and they present it, and it sounds nutty, but almost always there's an element of truth to what they're saying. So when you say, like, is there a national pedophile network? The answer is yes.
Careful. YouTube will flag
I
you
know,
for that.
I know, but the answer is yes. And part of that was discussed in a major film with Michael Keaton, where they talk about it in the movie that the Vatican is helping with this and that they're moving priests around, right? So we have to have that discussion then at that point.
I think I know what movie you're talking about.
Is the Boston Globe reporting, it just came out. It won the freaking Oscar for Best Picture.
I
If I
thought you were talking
remember
about
right.
God, what is that movie called? It's something Horizon.
Damn, I can't think of the picture, but
It'll
it's
come to us.
it's Michael Keaton and the guy who plays the Hulk now, Mark Ruffalo, one of my favorite actors actually when he's not doing Marvel stuff. Yeah, it's a well done movie. It's really good. But it also just, like, to see, when I saw it in the theater, I was like, holy crap, because they're saying what all of these alleged lunatics have been saying for a long time, and it happens to be true. Like, the reporting is solid.
Well, it's on the FBI website. There's a Finders Guild that's all labeled down in there, but they said I think the conclusion to it was that there was no conclusive evidence to support that there was any child trafficking going on in the CIA, but also cannot deny the possibility that there wasn't a situation that arose where a CIA agent could have acted, but instead tried to use it as bait to lure to the, which is like,
Sure.
if it's a child being trafficked, you just get on it. You don't wait for to find the big honcho. You go and save that kid, in my opinion. But I guess the CIA thought they were leading to something bigger.
Well, and we know that those operations tend to be. I should be careful, I guess, about what I'm saying. But for example, the first bombing of the World Trade Center, the one that happened in, I think it was in '93, the FBI had gotten these guys to deal with these alleged terrorists, and they have a guy that's delivering a bomb to these guys, and the informant is saying on the transcripts, like, hey guys, we gave them the bomb. I think they're going to use it. Do I need to do something? And sure enough, they just let those guys blow the bomb off in the World Trade in the basement of the World Trade Center tower.
Do you know who Michael
It
Springman
was like
is?
a Michael Springman.
He wrote a book called Al Qaeda's Visas for Al Qaeda. He worked in the for the government doing the visa applications for Al Qaeda, basically, and the government side of things, bring people over there. And the people that the terrorists for 9/11 were people that he denied visa applications to, but the CIA pushed it through.
That's where I
So
must have heard his name. I have not read his book, but I think he appears in one of the other books that I have talking about this. I haven't bought too many 9/11 books in the last probably 15 years, but I have all the ones that came out within that sort of 5-year period. And yeah, that sounds right. There was just a CIA document released, I think it was like last week, that indicated that 2 of the alleged hijackers were brought in by the CIA, which was, I think, the one of the English papers, I think, published the story. And then so you get these little these little breadcrumbs coming out later that show how these things are done. And the argument is exactly what you proposed here, is like they're trying to walk between the raindrops. They're like, well, we were doing this sting operation, and so we had to do these certain things. And it's like, okay, yeah, but and I've joked about this before, but like one of the things about the communist conspiracy in the United States is that more than half the people in the communist conspiracy were FBI agents, and they were the ones who paid their dues. So at a certain point, essentially the FBI is funding the communist conspiracy. Like there wouldn't be a communist conspiracy if the FBI wasn't funding it. So what is that? Like at what point does infiltration just become the thing that you are supposedly infiltrating?
do you think that the Fair Play for Cuba Committee and all those other fair play acts that were out there on college campuses were all ploys from the CIA or the FBI?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean it and what's his name? Oswald's handler down there in New Orleans, the ex FBI man, I just lost his name. Um, but that guy was doing it. Like that was what he was doing in New Orleans. He would infiltrate left wing groups or liberal groups on college campuses and try to get information about them and smear them and all that kind of stuff. So that's what he was actually doing. So it makes sense that when Oswald is out there as the only member of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New Orleans handing out leaflets, that of course that's part of an operation, because that's what he was doing at other places. Like it's the same, again, it's the same MO. Like they're still doing infiltration jobs. It just so happens that this one involves Lee Harvey Oswald.
Now, is the FBI creating domestic terrorism just so they can have a job? Like that's what it's starting to seem like, a lot of this type of stuff. I mean, the labeling of communism has completely stretched to being actual like communist viewpoints, to just being anything you want to label. Anyone that doesn't agree with you, call them a communist. I mean, and that's a really dangerous thing, because I think the extent of that is the fact that you won't ever be able to get a job again. You won't be able to do really anything because you're labeled a communist. I mean, word spreads around fast if you're labeled a communist. And back in America, back then in Apple Pie America, that's the worst thing you could possibly be called. It's like being called a terrorist today.
Yeah. No, it's I mean, Speaking of getting into trouble, right? But yes, that is essentially. Um, I would agree with that for the most part. That these institutions have created their enemies specifically so that they can continue the funding. Um, and then it's not just those institutions, by the way. Almost every institution exists like that. Just at a bureaucratic level, they're trying to expand. They're trying to funnel money into their operations, regardless of whether they're needed or not. Right? Does the United States need the largest military on the face of the earth? And do we
You're
need to be in?
goddamn right we do.
Do
I'm
we need
sorry.
to be in all these countries with all their bases? No, I mean, but those questions are never asked. You never ask those questions, or, and it's like even the defund the police thing, right? They should not probably have used defund the police as their slogan. But the idea is that police should we should not be paying for them to have tanks and freaking hand grenades and stuff. Like, what? That's not something that cops need. Um, it's not reasonable unless you pitch it that they are saving us from these horrible terrorist threats. And that was one thing that happened with the Black Panthers in the late 60s, right? In addition to the fact that the state came in and killed and imprisoned so many of those folks, it also helped their propaganda, because if you were in a uh, white part of the United States, say, that doesn't care for Black folks too much, the newspaper just has to run a picture of little Bobby Hutton or somebody with a gun, and like, oh, this guy's dangerous. Like, oh yeah, we need extra protection against these radical anarchists. But of course, they're not radical anarchists. They're just being abused by that same system. And now that they're trying to resist, suddenly they become the bad guys, which is true all over the world, right? I mean, we go into Vietnam, and the Vietnamese resist us going in there, then they become the enemy. But as I've said at other times, if when the Ferguson riots were happening, if Iran decided that they had interests in Ferguson, Missouri, and sent a battalion over to deal with the riots, would we think that was reasonable or acceptable? Or we say, hey, Iran, what the hell are you doing? Right? But we do that all the time, all over the world. We get to be special. Iran can't do that.
It, I mean, it brings. This is where I fall on like both sides of this type of stuff, because like I look at the church committee report and I'm reading it, and I'm trying to find a balanced approach, which is like, yeah, we do need national security. I think we really do need national security. I think we need government security as well too. I think there's a lot of good things that I know we can't know about. I understand, but define your terms. Is it that hard to just get you to define your terms? Because I feel like at this point now, it's much like I understand with YouTube policy now. They don't define the terms, so it's an open door policy. That worst part about it is that means you can keep making the mistake over and over again, or anything that they want to claim is against their policy, they can just stamp it on that. National security, if we get them to define their terms, then you can't, we know the parameters now. Now you can do something that's not in the parameters, and they can't just go, that's national security. I mean, that's the biggest issue with documents, but also, I mean, I get secrecy is needed on some aspects, especially when someone's overseas and it might be putting them at danger. William Colby had two people that were sitting right beside him telling him, hey, you can't expose that, because if you expose this, then you might be putting them at risk. That makes sense. But also just the fact that there's not really any accountability, there's not really any true messaging that goes across. I don't think that's crazy to say, but again, I'm not left or right. So like I saw recently, a lot of like the younger generation is a little bit more left on some things. But I saw a statistic that popped up. It was an article about more gun deaths in 2023 than there's been days. And I saw that and I go click on it and I look at it and I go, okay, is anybody looking at that the deaths, the death count? The death count is not every single one though. There's injured, yes, and gun issue is a problem. But it's that type of thing like where people go, people are dying all over. I'm like, yes, but I live near Baltimore. There's shootings that happen all the time. And it's just like you got to look at the injury part. What is that aspect of things? Is it just one person going in and killing a bunch of people, or is it nobody died, but there's injuries? I mean, that's an issue with guns, which I do have a problem with. But also, it's like trying to find the balanced approach here as well, too. If you just get charged up going like this, look at this article I just read, the headline of it, but you don't dive into it, then you're going to have criticism when someone comes against you. So I'm like, how do I find what's real? How do I find the truth in this? And how do I create a balanced approach without coming off as right or left, which is fucking impossible?
No, I think you just tell people what your biases are to start with. I mean, every human being on Earth has biases of one kind or another, and that's not a. It's just the way it is. We're human beings. That's how we operate. I'm quite comfortable, saying that I am, wildly to the left of most people. I mean, that's true.
You liberal. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, I'm way more leftist than liberal. Um, liberals tend to be in this country, a liberal typically is like a right wing centrist. It's not really a true left because we don't really have a left in this country. Not the way you would in other countries. You have this kind of this liberalism, which is like Hillary Clinton laughing about bombing people, and that's supposed to be on the left, stuff like that. So I'm very upfront about everything. Like this is why I think about this. This is the sources that I used. If you have a problem with the sources or you think I'm wrong, I don't mind being corrected. Like you just tell me, okay, yeah, you don't think that's right because of this and this and that. And if you make a good argument, then fantastic. Like I'm with you. So that I don't think that I worry about that too much. There's a couple of things I do worry about in general, and one is that one of the things that happened with Generation Z, right, is that because Generation Z grew up into all of this already pre-existing, they did not have an adjustment period. So when I was a kid, obviously, I didn't walk around with a cell phone all the time. I didn't have I wasn't connected to all these different things the way you can be from like birth to now, right? And I think what that did is it kind of decontextualized the world. So you have access to all possible information anywhere, but it's not in any kind of order that makes sense. It's just out there, right? And there is a lessening of the things that were almost universals for people of a certain generation. I think those are it's less true now because there's so many rabbit holes that you can dive into, that you can be, I'm into this and I'm only doing that. And it sounds facile, but being aware of general cultural touchstones keeps you intact as a society. And right now we don't have that. We have all these people that really despise one another. They hate each other because of their various political views. And I don't think there's really a solution to that. And in fact, I think it was just last week. I don't know if it was in Asia Times. I was reading an article about how you would petition the United States to avoid a civil war, because that seems to be where we're headed. Like if you look at the country and in terms of history and what has happened in other nations when you've had this degree of polarization, you are prepping for a civil war.
I notice it a lot when I'm on like Twitter, and I know you're on Twitter as well too, but like I think what Elon's doing is like I don't know why people have such a problem with him about like he's taking away people's checks and stuff like that. I think he's doing a lot of it just to be a dick on purpose. But he called out the NPR radio. He said, "You guys are percent funded." And they go, "Actually, we've put this in our thing. We're actually this percentage." And he goes, "Okay." And he just puts it right on their profile. And I like that because like all these news corporations, Fox that lost their check, NBC that lost their check, all these things that lost their check, they just constantly spread out all this stuff. And we've talked about it. We call them on it. Everyone sees it happening. But then there's not really anybody that follows through with it. Like they still get good reach. They still got all this type of stuff. And then Elon kind of takes that away. And I'm not supporting everything Elon does, but I've watched him take people, famous celebrities, call him out. And then he takes away their check and they're like, "Hey, give me back my check." And it's like this type of thing. It's like, well, what do you expect? I mean, he does run the platform. He's kind of playing God in a sense, but also you saw that. I don't know if you saw the interview with him on the BBC, but they straight up invited him on there. He posted the full recording of it, and they go, "What about your misinformation policies on Twitter?" And he goes, "What about the BBC's misinformation policies?" And they go, "Well, we're not here to talk about the BBC." He goes, "Yeah, but you brought the question up. What about the BBC's misinformation policies? You have wrongfully led people down the wrong road, and you guys are still doing it and have not made an apology about doing it." And the guy got silent on him and then tried to switch the question, and the interview got really awkward. And he was recording it on his phone on a Twitter space as well, too, because he didn't know how much they were going to be able to use of it. But to me, that was just interesting is we don't really have a whole lot of people who own tech companies that are really challenging things. And I only notice that the people that speak very opposingly about certain things, they happen to be really hardcore conservative. And my issue with that is it always goes into world population control. And I never think it's that. I never think it's that. And I try and draw the line. I'm like, I'm sure there's a little bit of it, but look, I don't think it's all about world population control, but they always jump into it. They'll jump in, and I see him now hitting the gender topic. I see him hitting bugs in our food topic, and I'm like, can I just like, can we just reel her back a little bit to the part where I do agree with you, which is the fact of like, there's a lot of lying going up, and censorship is an issue. Let's just stay in that little ballpark area.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, and that's what I was talking about. It's like you can go down these rabbit holes, and then it becomes your paradigm, and then everything you see after that reinforces the paradigm that you've created. So that tends to be an issue, and it's one thing that I try to guard on all the time. I'm always thinking about what are the reasons to not believe what I'm saying? What's the best form of that argument against what I'm saying? And then try to deal with it on those terms. Because what I'm trying to do is trying to keep myself, like a boxer, like I'm trying to keep myself in shape in that way to make sure that what I'm saying has some kind of basis. Because you're absolutely right. And it does make me at times seem kind of wishy-washy, because I will say, well, I speak in percentages sometimes. Sometimes I speak in terms of like, well, I think that maybe this is what's going on, but I'm not 100% sure. And could these, like, the right wingers be right? They could. I mean, there is evidence to suggest, again, if you look at the 10% of what they're actually saying, there's usually some kind of kernel of truth in what they're talking about. It may not be completely the truth, and it also may not be true in the sense that they are reporting it. I mean, that was the whole thing about NPR, right? I used to joke about it, National Petroleum Radio, right? They have to make decisions about what they're going to cover, and invariably they make these decisions in accord with the state. They don't really, they don't do, this is not like Ramparts magazine, right? NPR is always kind of milk toast stuff, and if you are a raging conservative, it seems very liberal because you don't have the gun show or whatever on NPR, but it's not that liberal. I mean, it's liberal for people who are comfortable means, who live in nice houses and nice neighborhoods, and don't really want to spend a lot of time worrying about other stuff, right? It's not that NPR is bad, but they are what they are. And the same thing is true with Fox News and MSNBC and everything else. They all have their agendas. Now, the one thing I would say is that conservatives love to say that the media is liberal or leftist, and that is not true. Like, I understand they say things that you don't like, but those institutions, there are no leftist institutions in the United States.
Anderson
Right?
Cooper's not.
No, Anthony Anderson, CIA guy. No. Of course, the Democrats are in bed with the CIA now, which is another bizarre thing that's happened. It's like everything the CIA does is great, according to the liberals these days, which is a whole other topic.
How the hell did we get there?
Yeah, how did we get there? That's a question I've been asking for like the last 10 years. But something like MSNBC, the corporate owners of MSNBCs are not leftists. If they were leftists, they wouldn't be corporate owners, right? They make decisions that are based on money. The content, you know, they don't want to rock the boat too bad. They do have to have some information that is relevant because they depend on that information too. But they're not going to say, tear down the corporate state, right? They are the corporate state. So no, they're not leftists in that sense. They're liberal in the sense that right-wing conservatives think of them as liberal because they don't like gay people or whatever. But that has nothing to do with power and institutions. Does that make sense?
Kind of, but I don't know if it's my algorithm. I've just noticed a lot more of the what I would say the leftist idea is. And I try not to, I try and look at everything to be 100% honest with you. And the only voice I really see who's kind of spouting off complete, I wouldn't say complete nonsense, but he just do a lot of stuff for comedic effect. And it's Tucker Carlson. I don't agree with every single thing he has. I mean, he hits the gender topic. I'm like, keep that fucking thing away from me. I don't want to get anywhere near that. I just want to stay in my little boat. and with my hands up saying I'm not doing anything. I'm a person that's like live, let be. Like whatever happens, it's not bothering me. Like be gay. I don't. My grandma's gay. I don't care. I just it doesn't affect my life, so why do I give a shit? And I think that's kind of the basic principle with people. I think people start thinking that's going to affect their lives and they get really upset by it and overreact and types of things. Where I just go, it's not going to affect you. The only thing that's going to affect you is the price of gas. The price of gas has gone up. We got to talk about that. That's some big issue. But the way he does it, I don't appreciate. I don't appreciate the way that Anderson Cooper does it. But then I look at the media and I do see like, I mean, I would say like there's a good amount of censorship, I would say, but I think it's across the board. I don't think it's necessarily just one particular person. But there are some weird, interesting things that I feel like aren't covered by mainstream news, which I would assign them as left a little bit. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily right, but I just, a lot of the COVID stuff, a lot of that type of stuff, the only person I've ever seen voice an anti-opinion has been people that have been more towards the right or more towards the conservative thing.
Yeah, and so but that is a really strange phenomenon that I don't view as being political in that sense. So when I'm talking about um like a position as being on the left or on the right, I'm not really talking about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, because both of those parties are essentially manifestations of the same institutions and culture that we have in this country. And they're basically both on the right. If you look at it in terms of like even, well, the UK is getting like us. But most countries do not have a leftist position per se that is associated with something like the Democratic Party, which is a corporate party. And there was also a decision at some point, and again, we're talking about this in terms of bifurcating the public, which I think you're absolutely right about, is that whether you believe in COVID or not assigns you to either the Democratic or the Republican Party. So if you're a Republican, you cannot believe in COVID. And if you're a Democrat, you absolutely have to believe in COVID. And you have to believe that science is great. But science is great. It's not a position. It's like it's totally untenable. It's like saying yay. There's no intellectual uh, uh, there's no evidence, there's nothing. It's just science yay. And it's a way of not thinking. It's not a way of actually thinking, because if you were actually thinking, you would be suspicious of everything and you would investigate everything that's coming to you, and you would take all these points into consideration, because you're absolutely right. All the people who questioned COVID at the very beginning, except maybe Bobby Kennedy Jr., tend to be conservative and basically in the right wing, and they did not want to cooperate. But as we've gotten more information, as of this day in Apes here, and it's just like the gender thing. Nobody wants to talk about the gender thing except these kind of right wing ideologues, because it gets them a lot of attention. But you have to separate the issue of what's going on with a specific transgender person. And then what the right says is a push towards transhumanism. That, in other words, that one of the things that's going on is they're trying to dehumanize everybody, and we're getting artificial intelligence at the same time. And we're also going to need a lot less people to run things. So are any of those things true? But that's a separate question to what is going on with a specific transgender person. So should we support somebody who wants to be transgender? Of course. If that's what they want to do, it's fine. It doesn't hurt anybody. They're not hurting anybody. You know what I mean? There may be specific individuals who commit crimes, but then that's a poor use of reasoning, because you're using by group. You're saying, well, if this transgender person committed a crime, that means all transgender persons are. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, that's if I commit a crime, does that mean that every Mexican Jew commits crimes? I mean, probably, but I'm saying that's not a good way to reason. You don't reason that way. And I think those questions are separate. And it should be safe to investigate anything. And that's going to offend some people. And that is the price you pay for living in a democratic republic. And the problem is if you decide that you don't want to hear about those things, you are building your own fascist empire, which in this case is going to be a technocratic one, right? It's going to be the guys like Elon Musk that end up running things.
I don't want that, but I just get a little bit scared when it comes to the amount of censorship on there because I start thinking what's going to be like in the next couple of years. I mean, anybody there was a peak number of podcasts that started up during the pandemic because everybody's on lockdown. You can start up a podcast. Now the giant drop off was after everybody returned from being on lockdown and going back to their jobs. Now, people kept up with that. People kept going. I had my show before, and then I still keep it after. But people kept going for as long as they could, thinking that this is a way to go there. When I start realizing is that that market dropped off quick. I think 2 million something podcasts dropped off. And then you have this kind of, I would say, steady bit with newer ones coming up and newer ones dropping off. But initially in the beginning, there was only a couple 100,000 podcasts out there. And then there was a spark up like 2 million something. And then next, it dropped off again. What I'm saying is when you put this digital platform as the keys to make a career, do all this type of stuff, it becomes a danger because what's happening now is this gateway of freedom through the internet, freedom of being able to express yourself and say what you feel and whatever your thoughts are, is now being closed. So now it's being limited very much so to the point where anybody new who has the idea of, I want to do this, it's like, oh, you should have been here 5 years ago. It's like, what do you mean? It's like, well, it's damn near impossible to do anything right now. I mean, already making currency off this thing is damn near impossible, depending on what levels you're at. But it now becomes to the point where it's so fragile, and you're now trying to build a system in something that is so fragile. And I think that's only because we've gotten to a point now where the word freedom of speech does not mean the freedom of speech that it was initially written down to mean. Now it's starting to be like freedom for what I would consider my terms of speech. And we can't have that because nobody is fit to be able to make those rules. Nobody on the left, nobody on the right, nobody on anything, no human being in the world. And I get it, the misinformation stuff, but what are we calling misinformation? Because most of the Kennedy stuff could be labeled misinformation, and there could be documents to back it up.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's the point. I mean, and that's what I've been hollering about this for a long time and writing articles about it. Is that um, this is where we've been going forever, and I think that's part of the purpose, whether they knew it or not, of people like Alex Jones and Jim Fetzer, who um, became the voices of a movement and then promptly got destroyed in public um, because they hold these crazy opinions in some cases. And it makes people think that anybody who talks about conspiracies is like Alex Jones or like Jim Fetzer. And it's not true, but it's what the associations are. And so since it has a negative association, it then becomes, well, why are you talking about this stuff? Obviously, only crazy people talk about this stuff. And it becomes a self-censorship. And it makes all the regular censorship easier because, again, the government would prefer that we only talk about government-approved topics. Schools would like us to speak only about school-approved topics. And I'm sorry, that's not going to cut it. And it's also self-defeating because if you isolate everybody and you destroy their education and you don't allow them to talk about everything under the sun, you're setting the stage for the wipeout of your own society. Right? In order to grow, in order to get better, we have to be able to explore everything. Are some people going to take advantage of that? Are some people going to say, well, I hate women or I hate gay people and I think they're stupid and they're yes, some people are going to do that. So there's assholes like in the world. Cost of doing business. It is the cost of doing business. Because if you start to cut that stuff off, you're going to end up cutting everything that you value off as well. It's just the way it is.
It becomes a real danger because if you look at swearing being something that is not approved and you have to censor swearing now, you have to censor a lot of different things. I mean, the school education thing I might have a different opinion on only because I've noticed in the education system they don't not teaching things properly. And I've given them credit for being able to move forward in a very large way and a lot of aspects of things. But also, you have a bunch of kids that are coming out of school thinking that like the world's evil and it's only this ethnicity that's being treated bad. And I can't get there with that. I look at people as people. So it doesn't matter what color skin you are, what sexuality you are, any of that type of stuff. I don't care. All I care about is can I have a conversation with you and we can have that happen. And when I have a bunch of my nephews that are like, here's the COINTELPRO program. It's horrible and all this type of stuff. And I go, yes, but why is it? And they just go, it invaded the Black Panther Party. I go, specifics, please. And then I'm sending them the document of like sending letters to the Black Panther Party leaders' wives saying, hey, you know, your husbands are sleeping around with teenage kids. And I go, but here's the thing. They didn't just infiltrate the Black Panther Party, they infiltrated the KKK. They infiltrated this, they infiltrated that. That's not sticking up for the KKK, but it's saying this shows you about what they can deem and what they can go after. And that just shows you government power and control. So, yes, those KKK is terrible, but you got to look at these types of things and you got to confront your own bias as well too. The things that you're already it's and that's like saying that and trying to get people to follow that. They'll immediately go, "Are you a Trumper? Are you this?" I'm like, "This has nothing to do with any of that." The fact that you have to disclose before you say something about, and I will say this, Trump's administration did one really good thing, and that was dealing with China. And that's what the Biden administration picked up from the Trump administration because they were tough on China. Okay. Now, when you say something like that, you immediately have to go, "I'm not a Trumper." We can't do that in society. We can't have conversations about stuff like that. There needs to be real things when you look at like ethically, how do we deal with certain problems and certain issues? But younger generation with their education that they're getting from school is like there's this amount of going against this and this. I'm like, you got to teach this properly. We got to start talking about like here's this and here's this and here's how they were thinking of this. It's like putting it into context, which is hard to do. I get it for teachers to do with their students, but to me, I just started noticing that more. Like I think I would probably slide more left than I did before I started the Kennedy assassination topic. But really, I'm just looking at this because I'm reading the Church Committee report and I'm looking at the CIA on college campuses. I'm looking at a bunch of unethical things that are going on, research influence from capitalist businesses that are going on there. You know, that's a really big problem. I don't think that makes me left, but some people would identify that as left. What I think that makes me is a person that understands that this is seriously wrong. This is not right. Much like when I bring up the example, and I will fight this unpopular opinion, but it comes in defending Charles Manson. I think Manson should have got locked up 100%. I am not saying anything different, but the fact that Vincent Bugliosi put a prosecutor on the defendant's team to sabotage the court case, I say that's it doesn't matter if he's right or wrong. It's the fact that he's an American, he has rights to a fair trial. Okay. Let the public decide for themselves. They're smart enough to, but the fact that you influence and you cheat and you lie, you get in a position like we do today with court cases. It's just a game. I'm winning. I'm going to win this. I'm not going to lose. We get in that situation, which is the big core problem out of all this. When you're so blinded by hate, or you're so, what is it? What's slow to learn, but quick to anger? When you get to that position, where's the truth anymore? The truth comes out. It always does. And it takes time, sure. But when I see 100% where it's just fighting from the one side thing, and I mentioned you in our first chat about more people believe conspiracy in Martin Luther King assassination. Then you get to the Kennedy assassination, and people will just fight to the teeth and bone that the government was true on this. And I go, it's not about it was a president. It's not about it was a certain ethnicity. You just got to look at the basic facts of the case. And the facts is this weren't an investigation into Kennedy's assassination. When you're so one-sided, you cannot look at anything that's not in that one side. And I'm like, we got to try and find a really critical thinking point. I'm sorry I ranted.
No, that's okay. I know, and I think you bring up a good point at the very beginning when you were talking about. Um, I know parents get upset. Their kids go to college and they learn that the United States has committed all these atrocities and things, and then the traditionalists get upset at that. Um, and they're not being taught incorrectly, but I do think this is part of this whole decontextual issue. Is that I don't take away from the premises that say the United States killed several of its own citizens, and as opposed to people who are black getting into powerful positions and all. That's all true, but it's not. It doesn't mean that white people are specifically evil. Okay, you could make a study, for example, of Japanese atrocities against the Chinese.
Unit 731 killed 610,000 Americans. That's more than Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
So the history of that will tell you, oh my God, and are the Japanese racist, like as a people against certain things, including the Chinese? I mean, yeah, or they have been at various times. In fact, most cultures are racist in that way because they are viewing everybody else as the outsider, you know, and they don't say, open arms, right? We say they're different, we don't like them, and those differences can be minute. Um, so that's it's an incorrect um, judgment that they're drawing from that. And when I talk about this, I don't say like I hate white people. Okay, that's not what this is. What you really hate are these institutional powers that tend to favor white people because those are the people that are in power in this country. But if circumstances were different, um, things could be different. In other words, you might have, like I say, in Japan, there'd be outward racism towards anybody who's Gaijin, who's not Japanese. Um, and if you did, you can do a study of that, and studies have been done of that. And just one example, I'm not picking on Japan. I'm just saying that of all the cultures, you're going to find these kinds of things going on. And so the point is not Japanese are evil or white people are evil or any of that stuff, but to attack the institutional powers that are making these decisions. So we need to get more cooperation in that regard to view people for the context of their character, including white people. Even W.B. Du Bois wrote an essay about the black artist, and he said the black artist has a responsibility to have black Iagos as well as white Othellos. And in other words, that no race is all bad or all good, and talking about it in those terms doesn't even make any sense. It's about individual people. And I think that a lot of the college students that you're talking about do miss out on that. They have a tendency to just say, well, this person's trash, so therefore the hell with them. And like the world isn't that simple. It just isn't. You can't dismiss all of Plato because he existed in a society where there was slavery, because there's a great deal of wisdom to be found in the Republic, for example. That's just how it is. I mean, everybody's flawed. Everybody has stuff that they've done, and we have to try to work together with each other and not just label whole races as trash because of this or that other thing. It's very simplistic thinking, binary thinking.
It's when I started learning about media manipulation, not just in like this J. Edgar Hoover's FBI and movies and stuff of that sort, but then seeing it everywhere. I mean, you can look at the movie Air as a Nike propaganda film that just came out about Michael Jordan and Nike. I mean, that's really they made the Adidas company look like Nazis. They're sitting at like a stone table basically, and it's just a bunch of Germans on one side. Like it doesn't look good. Um, but you're really when I started looking and examining now more about films and so much media manipulation, one thing I keep pulling out of is the labeling aspect of things. And I know our government has done that. You see that with the Kennedy assassination witnesses that were never questioned anymore because they were deemed unreliable. But then you see labeling happening today with people calling other people racist and all this type of stuff, which I've only come in contact with because when I have a guest on my show, they assume that you have the same views as that guest sometimes, and they assume that you're right wing or left wing, and it becomes very difficult because I have a whole mix match. And I think since our first episode, I mean, you've decided to join me back for a third time, but I think from our first time, you can see like I'm trying to understand a lot of it. I'm trying to catch up on the times and everything, but it's extremely difficult because I like learning about the 60s and 70s, and I believe in the counterculture revolution that was happening. And it's when I had someone named Abe Peck on my show, he told me, he goes, I worked for The Seed, which was a newspaper back then that would put out a lot of like counterculture type magazine stuff. And he goes, looking back at it, he goes, I see faults on both sides now. And it's like looking from an older perspective, where I go, yes, but it's that kind of hindsight that you get so longer later where I'm trying to have that in the moment of it. Like, what's this going to lead to with this? What's this going to do with that? And whenever I talking to like I would say my little cousins, they're a friend of my family's basically. Our parents are friends, so then that's how it works. But they're like fresh out of high school now. So they're like 18, 19 years old, and they'll send me something like, did you see this? Did you see this? And I was like, I did. But do you know that there's this part to it too? Like, can you read this part and read this document? And I know you're interested into it, but let's have like a discussion about it. But then I always like bringing up the opposite side of things, maybe a side that I don't necessarily agree on. I do that with the Kennedy assassination, and people think I'm like a Warren Commission guy. I'm not at all. But I'm really just trying to say, if we say something, can I disprove myself? And if I can disprove myself, then that means maybe there's another thing that I'm missing. And I try and do that. Like, I don't think everybody in the assassination, the DPD and all this are all corrupt. I think it's a couple guys at the top. But we do need to talk about what are things to get the public in on the discussion. And when you start going into Jack Ruby planted a bullet on a stretcher, I start going, we don't even need that. We can just get to look at the bullet. It doesn't make sense that it does all that and looks like that. So if we can get there and we start understanding the culture and the times and why it had to be Oswald and why Russia made a whole file system about the assassination because they were worried we were going to blame them, you start kind of going, does it seem more like a corrupt government aspect of things? I mean, how do you get to the autopsy from, a lone guy? You don't get it from that. You go start looking at the manipulation aspects of things, but it's that labeling. If you label that, you talk about the Kennedy assassination and you're not pro the narrative, then you're not a patriot and you hate America. And it's like, that's not what that is. It's being a patriot to recognize the evil within oneself. But
Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, which is why, I mean, I don't write about, other countries and their racist colonial practices that much because I live here. And I think it's the responsibility of people who live in their own countries to talk about what is going on in their countries that they don't like, that I think it's a terrible policy. I think colonialism has wreaked havoc all over the world, and it hasn't always been just the U.S. I mean, it's been other countries that have been involved in this stuff. Um, so yeah, no, I'm with you on that, and I think you're taking the right approach. So this is when I first got into this stuff. This is exactly how I did things, and part of that was because I was trained in philosophy, and the idea was that if somebody has an idea about the universe, say from a philosophic point of view, um, then you agree to accept it and internalize it and see if that makes sense or if that works on the outside world. And you say, okay, these are the pros, these are the cons. And I think that's true of everything. And I don't think anything's off limits, which a lot of people don't agree with. They do think that there should be limits, and I don't understand that. I'm trying to understand the world as best I can. I want all the information that's available to try and make that decision, including information that would be contrary to whatever position that I may hold right now. Everything's in flux all the time. And that's just, again, just to be human. We have imperfect information all the time, right? Just at a basic level. There are colors that we know exist that we can't see, right? When I was talking to the friend of mine, he was saying, wouldn't it be interesting to live in the ocean? Like, what if you could breathe water? And I said, we already do live in an ocean. We live in an ocean of air. And if you lived in an ocean of water, you wouldn't notice it. It would just be natural. You're like, okay, yeah, this is you wouldn't be thinking like, oh, I'm breathing water. In the same way, we don't think, oh, I'm breathing air all the time. It's just the way it is. And it is a physical thing that we're breathing into our bodies and breathing out. So there are all these internal biases, and some of the biases have to do with being an actual human being, right? A dog can hear sounds that I can't hear, and a shark can smell things that I can't smell. It's just the way it is. I can't run as fast as a cheetah. All these different things that we know that exist in the world that we do not have direct access to. We just don't. So we're trying to do our best, but we are in some ways fumbling around in the dark on all of these issues.
It just seems like the most risky gamble to try and be 100% against anything. And when I mean anything, I just mean when you start going against like the people in the assassination, 100% that there's no proof to this, no this. I'm like, what happens if you're wrong though? Like that's the thing. Like that makes you look even worse. Where it's like, wouldn't you just want to be like, okay, or just say like, I don't know. I mean, nobody knows 100% for sure about anything. So is you're being 100% against something. I mean, besides like killing and murder, and I mean, it's kind of the same thing, but just one's a different legal name for it. But things of like certain sorts where it's like racism, if you're like, you can be 100% against that. That's fine. I'm not 100, I don't like racism at all. I think it's horrible that we demean people, but there's other topics of conversation that are like controversial things, 9/11, JFK, all of these. This isn't just like, oh, well, a random this thing happened. It's like, no, there's something fishy going on. And when like there's a skeptic argument here, and the skeptic argument is that people just can't believe with some of these controversial things that this type of incident could happen. I'm like, that's a really shitty answer because there's upon thousands of things that have happened that are not even controversial, that are crazy as shit. And nobody has ever questioned it because it's not suspicious. But when you look into 9/11, when you look into, I'm not even talking about the towers or anything, but I'm talking about the fact that that scrap metal was sold so quick. Even if it's not a conspiracy, what it is it shows what the fuck is our government's problem. And that's the real thing that I look at with the Kennedy assassination. I don't need the conspiracy aspect of things, but to say that there's something ethically going on here that is wrong, that's not a conspiracy. That's just looking at what the hell that they did. The agencies did. All these people did to hide information, destroy documentation, hinder investigations. That's the base level right there. That doesn't make it a controversial or conspiracy claim. That just goes, you want answers about, give me the facts of what you guys were doing around this time and why were you doing that?
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think that's exactly right. And that was, I mean, tinfoil hat not included. The book I did last year was that's basically the thesis. Is this is what I'm arguing? Is that typically because the term conspiracy theory is just not very well defined, and what it tends to mean is stuff I don't like, stuff the state doesn't like. Is an important bit of that. But when people don't want to hear about it, they're just like, I don't want to. Yeah, I don't want to do that. It's, yeah, I don't want to.
You can just get rid of the skeptics by bringing up the LGBTQ thing because that whole group should just be attacked. Not the LGBTQ, but the skeptics. Because I see so many of the skeptics, they say something, and I'm like, oh God, if you could just get the LGBTQ people on you, you'll be done in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, I'm going to talk specifically about like the Shermer types, but they tend to say, well, you believe this because you are stuck in your paradigm of what you're thinking, and it's like, Shermer, you're stuck in yours. Like, that's not a way to address the situation, because all you're saying is that from my point of view, I believe this and they believe that because they've got that point of view. Well, okay, well, that's fine, but that doesn't actually get us anywhere. So unless you're willing to actually do some work and find out what the hell's going on, then you can't just make these pronouncements that way, which tend to be very empty. And Chomsky does the same thing. He does this hand waving of, oh yeah, there's a bunch of nonsense. And then Chomsky even went on this one tangent where he said that every scientific experiment has multiple answers that come out of it, and things go wrong, and there's always a problem. And it's like, really? I mean, it's such a hand waving general, like, and that's what happens is when these skeptics start talking, they don't want to go into specifics. They don't want to make any specific claims because they know they can be proved wrong if they make a specific claim. So they just say, well, it's all nonsense. I just don't want to go there. So, and sorry, that was my cat Lola, who's been making an appearance time to time. Hey, baby.
I mean, there's when it comes to like JFK related material, do you think that all of it should just be public domain?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've had some people bring up like, don't you
No,
want people
and
to
then,
make money?
oh, I see what you're saying. Well, if you're talking about government documents, then it should all be public domain because we already paid for it. Right? That's our stuff. It's our government. That material is ours. I'm not opposed to somebody making money from those documents. That's fine. I don't, you want to, I mean, I've
I
read
meant
books
things
that
like the
have,
Zapruder film, things that the 6-4 museum claims that they'll sue you if you use. There's a bunch of
yeah,
things
well,
that
the
I'm like,
Zapruder, that's a long, complicated story to get into the Zapruder film. But the fact that it was, I think, $16 million went to the Zapruder family for
I thought it was
that.
10 million.
I think the number I remember is 16. You may be right, but it's a lot of money. Um, that is obviously highly questionable. And the fact that the Sixth Floor Museum claims to own the copyrights over any piece of material on film that has to do with the Kennedy assassination, I think, is also absurd. Um, it's a ridiculous thing, and they want you to pay these exorbitant amounts of money to use a clip of Dan Rather or something from 1967. I think all that stuff's ridiculous, but I'm not opposed to individuals making money by writing. I mean, obviously, I write books and I don't make a whole lot of money, but it's obviously not something that I'm opposed to. I think people should be able to do whatever they want in that regard.
I don't mind them putting it in a book and making money off the book, but I just wish that it wasn't only their book where you could find the information. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there should just be a public source access for a lot of these documents. Like the one, even Jack Ruby's Parkland medical receipt comes from Judith Very Baker. And it's like, do I trust her on every single thing? No. She put up a post from GTA 5 asking if this was real or not. And I was like, Jesus Christ, it's a goddamn video game. But I think that's, I mean, she's old.
I will defend her on that one. She's an older lady. I mean,
I know, that's what I said. I said she's older. She might not know, but that's fine. But then like I'm looking at like a document that she had that she happened to be at the archives and take a picture of, and it is a Parkland medical receipt for the number of X-rays Jack Ruby got. It was like 200 something X-rays in a matter of like 2 weeks. That's real, but it's only the picture that she took off of her phone when they put it in the archives. It might be a document that's still not released. Where I'm like, but that's really important stuff right there. I mean, we still don't have the Clinton incident with Lee Harvey Oswald released yet. The only thing you can find it in is in God, what's his name? John Armstrong's book?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's only in his book where he has it
Eugenia's
covered.
written about it too, for sure. And I think Paris Flamand
Who?
wrote an early book about Jim Garrison, called the God, I think it was just called the Kennedy Conspiracy. Yeah, Kennedy Conspiracy. Paris Flamand, very he was actually he was a writer and a reporter who I'm sorry, my cat is running all over the place. Paris Flamand was a writer and a reporter who got excited by the Garrison case and actually went down to New Orleans to kind of write a book about everything that was going on and to help out the case. Very interesting book. Kind of rare now. I think it's like I've seen it for like a couple $100 online. But yeah, you know what? I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry, my cat disturbed me.
That's fine. No, I was just talking about this finding certain things in certain books where there's not
Yeah,
released.
yeah, and I get where that's coming from. I do want to say though that in regard to that, like I hear what you're saying, and I think the document should be free to access, but the information, I mean, somebody spends 10 years working on a book. I mean, I think they should be compensated for that work. So it doesn't have to be a lot, but and believe me, writing a book about the Kennedy assassination is not a way to make money.
I agree. That's how, I mean, they should get paid for that. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that part. What I'm saying is that if they put it in a book, I also think that it should be public access as well too. Like someone can't just be like, you have to buy my book to find out. I hate that shit because it's like I can't read for shit. So it's like, besides a document, something that's short, condensed, I can look at that. But when you go, you got to buy my book. I was like, so I have to pay you $60 to find the document, but they don't have the document accessible. You know what I mean? Like, I think it sparks up interest to be able to, obviously anybody wants to make a work about it or anything, but having those online as well too. I mean, we're lucky that people are able to scan those in online. Like Bart Camp has been able to put a bunch of Malcolm Blunt stuff on there and keep those documents. But I mean, the limiting of access, like you can only get it in a particular book, is just upsetting to me because I'm like, well, then I gotta buy the book to get the document. Don't you just have a page where the document's uploaded? Like, I'm not saying don't make money if you want. People are gonna buy your book anyway just to see what you put together, but it's the actual document is what I want to see, what the government said.
Yeah, no, I think all that stuff should be free. I mean, it absolutely should be free. It belongs to all of us.
Because
So
for
yeah.
some reason, as much as we antitrust the government, we still trust their damn documents in court to use as like verifiable evidence. Fuck.
I wasn't gonna go there, but yes, when you were talking about that, I mean, that's the problem, is that some of these, and in fact, at the Memphis conference, we should bring this up, but uh
Did the guy who said it was the Israels come? Did he show up?
oh, I don't know, because I
Oh,
was
okay.
only there for
That's
a
right.
little what, because by video, but I did see right before we went on with our panel, Robert Groden was talking about the Macaulay, what is that document? The Roe Macaulay document, Macaulay Roe document. Anyway, I think that document is too good to be true. I mean, is it true? Maybe. I don't know. But he talked about it again because it's in his book. And it's just, I've always looked at that gun. Yeah, I don't know about this. So who knows? Because there are definitely, we know that there are fake documents in the record. And how do you determine that? And I think that's the biggest issue, that other than the privacy and the censorship issue, is with the explosion of AI too. it's going to be even harder to determine what the hell's real and what isn't in general for everything, not just when you're trying to chase these national security documents all over the place. That's yeah, that's going to be a hell of a. I don't envy people who are just starting off, who are trying to navigate the upcoming world.
Starting off, I've been in it for a year. No, it has gone by pretty quick. That passage of time slips by. Once now I understand when someone says, I've been in it for like 50 years. I'm like, okay, I can see it now. It sucks up your life.
Yeah, yeah. You got to kind of guard against that, but I always thought, a really good study of what can happen is David Fincher's film of Zodiac, which is a great picture. It's basically completely untrue. Like, just almost all of it is not true. But if you take it as just a movie, it does show how if you get obsessed with one of these things, you can lose your family. Because you're just obsessed with this one thing. And I think that movie dramatizes that very well, even though it gets a whole bunch of real facts wrong. But it's still a good movie.
Do you ever regret researching into the Kennedy assassination?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Is it just the time suck to it, or is it just
No, it's because it led me into finding all this other stuff, and none of it's any good. Like when you start digging at the root of evil, um, it's all bad news, and it's overwhelming because there's the forces that are aligned against you are just they're totally out of proportion. I mean, it really is a David and Goliath thing that we're trying to do, which is why I respect, whatever else Bobby Kennedy Jr. has done in his life and is doing, the fact that he's putting himself out in a big way and he understands the history of what happens to his family members more than anybody else. To do this is a credit, more power to you. Whatever happens with that situation. But yeah, no, I do. I mean, I tend to be. I mean, I've always looked at the sort of darker side of things in general, um, but when you get into this stuff, you realize that everything is crazy. The world is upside down. And as I've talked about before, that something like the World Wildlife Fund is just a cover for more colonialism. Yeah, I don't like finding out stuff like that, and it's all over the place.
you've talked about the World Wildlife Fund being a cover up?
Yeah, although not here, maybe not on your show, but I have before. Yeah, the World Wildlife Fund is used as a cover for um, mercenaries that force indigenous peoples off their own lands in Nepal and other places because they're saying that we need this land to preserve the environment, but it's actually real estate. It's a land grab, and it's also a way for us to get into other countries. And what do we do? We get ourselves a little piece. We start sending soldiers. We start sending people to build. And all of a sudden we got an airstrip. We got, what I mean? It's the same pattern over and over again. What happened in Guyana? What happened all over the place? So yeah, the World Wildlife Fund is not what you think it is. And there was a really great long article about them about 2 or 3 years ago that I talked about in some context, which I can't remember now. And that's the other thing, you get into so many different aspects of civilization, and I would like to report good news once in a while, but I almost never find it.
I think it's pretty good news that you're reporting. It's good for me. I'm more aware.
There you go. Well, but that's the thing, right? That's the whole thing. The Faust thing, right? You sell your soul for more knowledge. You want to know everything, but once you know it, you can't unknow it, and then it undergirds all of your other opinions about other things, and it changes the way you look at society. I mean, and I would love to believe, that there are good people working in the government, and there's people that are trying to stop this fascism that is overtaking it, technocratic fascism. I don't think that that's true. I mean, I would love to think that that was the case, but I don't. There's no evidence for it. Yeah. So that becomes an issue. Besides the fact that you tend to say, I mean, my whole life I've always said things that were bizarre that, because I always had a different way of looking at things. Um, but now it's informed by all the stuff we've done in our government's name.
I'd like to take up Randy Benson when he suggested that I'd speak with you at 3 a.m. at like a Waffle House. I feel like those conversations would be great.
Those old Copa conversations, yeah, those were great because we talk and yeah, I always remember this comment he made where God, I think it was after John died. I think we were up in DC and a friend of ours, Tim Plainfeather, and I were talking, and Randy was listening to us talk, and he was like, "You guys like have a whole shorthand of how you're talking," and it's like, yeah, because Tim has read like everything under the sun, and so we might just say, "Oh, it's like the Manson thing." It's like, yeah, yeah, no, I know. This is like the Finders, and like, yeah, it's like the Finders, like the Process Church, yeah, it's like the Process Church, and so we like have this like thing going, um, and it's always fun to find somebody who has read those things and does understand like what we're up against. Um, and those couple conversations were just the best.
How do I become part of the Copa?
Well, it's you don't because it doesn't exist anymore.
Damn.
Um, in 2014, when John Judge died, he did not want Copa to continue. He was already going to stop it. Um, he had talked to me about doing something, and I can't remember what we called it, but he was like, "Well, maybe if you want to keep it going, you can. It won't be under the Copa banner, but it'll be like Baby Copa. We'll figure out something." He had talked to me about that at the library in Waco, Texas, uh, um, about a year before he died, maybe less. Uh, but he did not want the Coalition of Political Assassination to continue as an entity after he was gone because it was his thing, and so we ended it then. I mean, we still have the Hidden History Center, but it's only a couple of folks, and there are other groups to join for sure, but mostly it's just hanging out, and that's how I met Mal Hyman. I mean, Mal Hyman was the at the Memphis conference that I just did. Mal was the moderator of the panel, and I met him probably 12 or 13 years ago in one of those dinners that Randy Benson's talking about, because we would have the conference all day, and it would frequently end like around midnight, and usually we'd watch a movie or something, but when we'd put a movie on for everybody else, John and Randy and I and Tim and some of these guys would all go go out to dinner. We'd have these dinners at 1, 2, 3 in the morning, after a long day, because it was the only time we could eat, and we would get into all these crazy conversations because we all have there's like a baseline. You can start talking, and things get wild. Things I wouldn't normally say on a show. So
That's
Randy's
fair.
right about that.
That's fair. But
No, because when it's inside baseball. So
I gotcha. I appreciate the time you gave me to talk again, Joe. I really do. I always enjoy your perspective on things as well too. But is there a place
no,
where people can?
I think you're doing great.
Is there a place where people can find your links?
Yes, Joe Green JFK, as always. I actually, if anybody is interested in my plays, I just put this bad boy out, which is uh, my plays, three of my plays, actually four of my plays that have been produced. Um, the three of them are full length plays, and one is a one act that was put on last year. So if anybody's interested, there is. I would say that in my plays it is definitely informed by my research. So while plays are not themselves necessarily about conspiracies, they're certainly informed by them. So if you're interested in that, you may be interested in this.
I'll link
A
those in
quick
there.
plug.
I like it. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna shame it at all. It's good. I, I'll link that link and also your Joe Green site as well too, into the description for people to be able to click. And also check out Joe's other past episodes about his book Tinfoil Hat, or no, Tinfoil Hat Not Included. That's what it is.
That's the one.
Yep.
Yeah.
And thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.